The subtitle of Louisiana's story goes something like this: from necessity is the mother of invention. And unfortunately, as Davis pointed out a few minutes ago, our governor over the last 8 years cut over $700 million from higher education. That resulted in a reduction of our state general fund of about half. But I'm not here to complain. Instead, it has become one of the great stories, I think, of community colleges, not because I was a part of it, but because we used it as an opportunity to transform ourselves. As you heard a few minutes ago, as Amber talked about the Lumina report that was just released back in April, Louisiana made gains from 50th in the nation in post-secondary attainment to 26th. Pause and think about that for a second. From 50th to 26th. Huge gains. Now, to the credit of Lumina, an organization that initially was hesitant to include credentials below the associate degree, when they realized that the data was very clear that the economic impact for those people who earn credentials below the associate degree was obvious from a wage perspective, from an earnings perspective, from a future college success perspective. And so they go back and they add those credentials. Louisiana's economy is one that requires people with skills below the associate degree. And so we have been one of the nation's leaders in producing certificates for many years. And so you begin to see how that impacts the economy and the offerings at our institutions. So I want to give you just a little bit of background as to where we have been. You know, when you lose $100 million in a $250 million organization, I want you to think of that in your own operations, okay? You probably had better think about changing. And the reality is, you'd better think about changing not in terms of how you look down and into the organization, but you'd better look up and out. And what Sandy pointed out a few minutes ago, he didn't give examples of all of the curriculum changes or department structure changes or all of these things down and in at his institution. He talked about the up and out. He talked about the population that we're serving. He talked about the needs of business and industry. He talked about the dynamics of the labor market, because that's what these institutions are about. And so community and technical colleges in Louisiana, realizing in this period of time where we cut $100 million, we narrowed the program offerings by 700 programs in 5 years. Now, if you've been through a program elimination in the higher education environment, you know it's painful. It's ugly. 700 of those in a period of 5 years, it will change your life, I can tell you. But it also changed our institutions, because what it did was it caused us to think much like the restaurant industry. We have in our hometown of Baton Rouge, we have a chain, a restaurant chain.
I'm hungry already. I'm hungry already.
It's not the up end that most of you have visited if you've been to Louisiana, but Cane's, it's fried chicken and French fries. That's it. That's all they do.
Sauce, don't forget the sauce.
And the sauce. Don't forget sauce, right? But I want you to think of this for a second. Who would have thought that you could have made a success out of chicken strips and French fries? But they've done it. And the reason that they've done it is they do it very well. And so what we have typically done in higher education is we've tried to be all things to all people. We can't be that. We don't have the resources to be that. We can't be the institution where students show up to find themselves. That's not us. Our students' population is not a population that's interested in climbing walls and lazy rivers. We're a very different kind of organization. So as you think about the impact of our institutions over this journey, we have eliminated a large number of programs. Our programs are much more adept now and aligned with the industry demands. Our average student population, 27 and a half years of age, very much oriented toward the workforce economy. Those program offerings, though, are limited today, and most of the resources that we spend are aimed at 7 occupations. Now, some people, when they hear that notion of 7 occupations, they're kind of concerned that we may be missing some things. Well, let me tell you, we don't have resources to focus on many more than 7 occupations. Healthcare is not one of those. In the community college world, when you tell people that healthcare is not one of your bread and butter programs, that blows them away. Well, wait a minute. What are the programs? Well, the programs happen to be economic driver programs. They're programs that bring new resources into our communities. They're programs that help to grow the economic whole of a community. Healthcare is a trailing indicator of the economy. It is a function of population and the health of the population. And so while healthcare is very important and we want to be a provider, want to ensure that there's a workforce. If we're going to grow our communities, again, up and out, we have to do so in a way that is going to be oriented toward those kinds of occupations that help the economy to grow. So the who, the what, and the how. Very simple framework that I'm sure you could use in your own organization. The who for us became very clear when we did an analysis of our demographics. 4.6 million people in the state of Louisiana. Of that 4.6 million, 2.3 million are working age adults. Of the 2.3 million, we did a very simple analysis that you could do in your own state of the educational attainment of the population. What we found was 670,000 adults with a college credential of some level. We found 550,000 adults with some college and no credential. You heard that referenced a few minutes ago. 525,000 adults with a high school diploma only, and 600,000 adults with no high school diploma. Just think about those demographics for a second, okay? As Sandy pointed out, those are not factors that you change overnight. Those are generational changes over time. And so it requires, if we're going to feed this economy in Louisiana, that, by the way, is growing. Louisiana's economy is growing while the nation's is a bit stagnant. We have over $180 billion worth of industrial construction going on from Lake Charles to New Orleans along the I-10 corridor. Think of that for a second. So where do we find those construction workers that we talked about a few minutes ago? Where do we find the industrial maintenance technicians who are going to serve those plants once they're built? Where do we find the process operators who will operate those facilities? They're turning to us. They're looking to your institutions to provide those. So the who is very clear. It's the 600,000 adults. In a later discussion, we'll talk about how we take those adults and bring them into our institution. How we had to rethink, as an example, the high school diploma as a requirement to get into college. I just have a fundamental question for you. Who said the high school diploma was required for college? It's the most ridiculous concept if you think of it. Education is not linear. It is an iterative process. The reality is most of those 27-year-old adults who show up at our institutions, they didn't quit school because of decimals or fractions. They quit school because of life circumstance. And they come back to us more motivated than they've ever been before. And there's a reason. They have no cushion. You see, you and I kind of have a cushion in life. They have none. They have kids depending upon them. They have lots of folks depending upon them paying their bills. And so that 5 to 6 week course that we talked about a few minutes ago may be the only option. It may be the only hope for them. And so the what becomes really important, because let me tell you something that we've learned about those adults. They have, excuse the phrase, they have a bullshit sensor like no one's business. You try to convince them that there's a job at the other end, they want to meet someone who's been through it. They want to know for sure that they're going to put their life on the line, that in 6 weeks, there better be a job there waiting for them, because they don't have another option. You are their only option. And when you realize that, you realize the gravity of what it is you've been given. You have an opportunity to fundamentally change not only one life, but a society. Democracy's college. The who, the what. You'd better be aligned with industry demands. It's an analytical discussion, but it's more importantly a discussion of partnerships with industry. And one of the recommendations I'll make to you in a second as the philanthropist community is don't be afraid to tie your investment to an industry investment. Many a times I've had a conversation with someone from the philanthropy community who was concerned about tying an investment from private philanthropy with an industry investment. A colleague in the back of the room, I've got to give a shout out to our friends at J.P. Morgan Chase, Liza Cowan. Story just probably a year and a half ago, I guess, but a little over a year. Our friends at J.P. Morgan Chase made a $1 million investment in our community and technical colleges, matched by $5 million from the state of Louisiana, matched by another, only $1 million required, but ultimately we were able to put together about $7 million from industry because there's such a demand there. Because let me tell you, when industry writes a check, they know that they're going to get something of value from that. And so we know that there's an alignment with the industry demands from a data perspective. We know that the industry has a willingness to write a check for that program. Ultimately, what's being produced, as was pointed out a second ago, we start with the end in mind. So the who, the what, and now the how. The how is compression of programs. You see, the big challenge that community colleges have had over the years is that we have been built in the image of universities, primarily because most of the people who built them went to universities, and that's what they know. The reality is the job of community colleges is so very different than that of universities. We've got to leave that behind. We are an open admissions institution. So we're in the process now of asking our colleges, why do we have an admissions office? Think of it. Everyone gets in. Why do you have an office that is admissions when everyone gets in? Those are the kinds of questions that you have to be able to ask yourself when there's a fundamental difference between our institutions and universities. But the reason is because there's a fundamental difference in our mission. We're very different in the way that we deliver what we deliver. Compression of programs, we have Sasol is a major industry partner of ours, has made billions of dollars of investments in Southwest Louisiana. They came to us and they asked, we are the primary provider of process operators for the industry. We were producing about 100, 120 process operators a year. And their question of us was, can we double in the next 3 years? And after the chancellor from that college sort of peeled himself up off the floor, he said, let me go back and talk to my folks and I'll let you know. Here's what he realized. He looked through the applications of the students who had made application for this program in the past. A full 40% of the applications had come from people who had already finished college degrees. These are $65,000 a year job starting salaries. So they've already finished all of the general education courses. All they lack are the content courses. We were able to go back and take that process technology curriculum with the help of the Louisiana Chemical Association and many of our employers, condense it down to a 16-week program, 8 in the morning till 5 in the afternoon, 5 days a week. You miss no days of the class. At the end of that program, we had 20 students start. We had 20 students finish. That's not a graduation rate problem, folks. These are folks who know that there's an impact at the end for their families. They're willing to pause. We had a dentist, a chiropractor, 2 principals, a multitude of school teachers who jumped into these programs and are now out there earning a great living. All of them went to work in the same zip code as the college. I want you to think of that. Again, it relates back to the community. Other examples in the construction field, a whole range of areas where there's alignment with industry needs. There's also compression of the curriculum to ensure that this population is able to go to work. What are the results? The results have been for us a doubling in the number of students who have graduated from our institutions in 6 years. We are now up to just over 22,000 students who graduated this past year. The prior year, we had about 20,000 students graduate from our colleges. That 20,000 students earned $723 million in the Louisiana economy. Now, I want you to think of this for a second. In Louisiana, you pay about 7.5% of your income back to the state in tax collections. So on $723 million, at 7.5%, you're giving back to the state in about 20 months the full measure of what the state gave to us to operate. That's an ROI that's pretty solid. Within 2 years, we believe that we'll be at the $1.3 billion range. The graduation numbers are increasing. What's most impressive is in a 4-year period, we went from 40% of our graduates being in high demand fields to over 70% of our graduates in high demand fields. Again, the impact of narrowing the curriculum, but yet continuing to increase in the number of students who are graduating. All of this in a demand environment. I think the driver behind this is not only the financial impact of what would happen to our colleges if we didn't change, but it's also the fact that our environment is such, our economy is such, that there's a great level of demand for what it is that we're doing, similar to the demand that you heard Sandy talk about earlier. So again, the who, the what, and the how. From a philanthropy point of view, made one of the recommendations, consider co-investing with industry. The other things that I would encourage you to do is think beyond scholarships, as you heard earlier. Scholarships are not the great need that we have in institutions. Be willing to take a risk. Be willing to take a risk on not institutions, but the people that you're investing in. You're investing in institutions to ensure that people cross that stage and cross that threshold. Hold us accountable not just simply for the credentials, although I appreciate the Lumina goal. hold us accountable not just for the credentials, but what happens as a result of the credential, the earnings, the fiscal impact, the economic impact, the equity impact that happens for families. So appreciate the fact that we're having a conversation about community and technical colleges with each one of you. It is truly, you've heard the term democratic institutions, but I will tell you they are the most transformational institutions and entities that you can find in any community. At the intersection of K-12 and post-secondary education, at the intersection of the not-for-profit community, all of those different organizations can be found on community and technical college campuses and partnerships. And so if you want to make a single investment in a single place that has high impact, community and technical colleges are about as good of an investment as you can make. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you today.